Hello all. The following presentation is by Catherine Seifert, Caitlin Walbridge, Elizabeth Darnall, Benjamin Levine, and Peter McCabe. We will detail our methodology in response to requests from the UN Environmental Program, or UNEP, for a methodology that assesses flooding and evacuation efforts in the Democratic Republic of Congo. First, we'd like to detail the problem presented to us. The DRC is highly vulnerable to a range of natural disasters, including droughts, floods, volcanic eruptions, and landslides. In recent years, flooding and landslide events have been on the rise due to record rainfall. Increasing frequency and severity of natural disasters in the DRC, particularly in the South Kivu province, directly threaten lives, infrastructure, and regional stability. Communities already facing fragile conditions due to poverty and limited access to services are now being further endangered. Without effective disaster response planning and reliable geospatial intelligence, at-risk populations may be left without safe evacuation options or timely assistance. Understanding the impact of these disasters and identifying vulnerable populations and areas is essential for saving lives and for future planning. In response to this problem, the UNEP is currently supporting research and analysis efforts. We are assisting UNEP in determining safe evacuation routes and identifying vulnerable populations in the South Kivu province. This map identifies where the South Kivu province is in the DRC, and these images depict flooding in the South Kivu province. This graphic shows precipitation rates in the DRC from 2021 to 2023. In response to UNEP's request, we have developed a methodology to answer the following question. Are there identifiable trends in flooding and landslides in the South Kivu province that can help us anticipate evacuation efforts and plan safe routes for those in immediate danger? To develop our methodology, we began by presenting the problem as outlined above and proposing 4 hypotheses in response. Our hypotheses are as follows. Flooding and landslides are concentrated along river basins and low-lying areas with steep terrain, which will help us map out flood-prone areas and floodplains. These areas will likely need to be evacuated first. Areas with high rates of deforestation and/or poor land management are most susceptible to landslides, and so they should be evacuated first. Flooding and landslides are predictable events, therefore areas with the predicted heaviest flooding should be evacuated first. There is no reliable spatial or environmental pattern that can be used to predict flooding. Flooding occurs randomly in any area where heavy precipitation is present. From there, we outlined our assumptions. The following are some of our assumptions. Higher populated areas in the South Kivu DRC that are receiving or expecting to receive impacts from flooding will be evacuated first. That is, evacuation prioritization is influenced by population distribution. The evacuation of easily accessible areas in the South Kivu will be prioritized over areas that are harder for responders to reach. Infrastructure in South Kivu is capable of moving people to or out of an emergency area. Populations that are affected by flooding are both willing and able to evacuate. Historical flood data impacts current evacuation strategies. Past evacuation routes are maintained and usable, and there is historical data available for analysis. From there, we detailed any limitations. A few of the limitations we identified are as follows. We have no control of the data available to us, and among the available data sets, we cannot control the quality. Flood events alter the physical landscape, which may make long-term analysis variable and dynamic. Classifications and impacts may need to be frequently reassessed. Certain man-made structures may not be shown in official maps or data that we find. This means that either potential evacuation routes could be missed or population density data may not be accurate. Collecting data and conducting interviews may not be possible in some areas. Data that is available comes from different sources, making it challenging to synthesize for analytical comparisons and evaluations. The following outlines the data used for each hypothesis. Hypothesis 1. Prove whether or not low-lying areas are surrounded by steep terrain are more susceptible to landslides. Data description. Topographic, hydraulic, and geological data. DEMS, slope angles, flood and landslide incident data, and drainage systems. Formats would be raster DEMS, vector, and our sources would be remote sensing, hydraulic datasets, and geological surveys. Existing data, DEMS and slope data from USGS, river and drainage data from hydrosheds or OpenStreetMap, incident reports from relief organizations or local government archives will be downloaded into the same spatial reference system for analysis. Additional data, manually compiled incident spreadsheets from field reports, local records, or crowdsourced efforts. This includes digitizing maps, extracting info from PDFs, and geocoding local damage reports. And usage, identify terrain patterns that correlate with historical flooding and landslides, overlaid with population data to prioritize evacuation risk zones. This helps define floodplains and assess terrain vulnerability. Hypothesis 2. Prove whether or not areas with high rates of deforestation and or poor land management are more susceptible to landslides. Data description. Land cover data, such as satellite or aerial imagery, deforestation rates, and land use change, paired with soil classification and drainage maps. Existing data, satellite imagery from NASA Earth data, existing land classification from Global Forest Watch, soil or drainage data from FAO or World Soil Database. Additional data, manual annotation or AI-assisted classification of vegetation loss over time using object-based image analysis, ground truthing if possible through local partner organizations. In usage, analyze correlation between vegetation loss and landslide zones, integrate soil instability and slope conditions to flag high-risk areas, compare with population data to assess human exposure and find the safest evacuation routes. Hypothesis 3. Determine whether areas that are forecasted to receive or have historically received the most rainfall are also the most susceptible to flooding. Data description. Meteorological data, flood risk zones and early warning systems, formats, time series, raster, vector overlays, sources, NOAA, Meteo Blue, regional weather centers, and predictive models. Existing data, rainfall history, modeled flood zones from government hydraulic agencies, population data, acquired via downloaded or searching national reports. Additional data, region of South Kivu may not have accurate or up-to-date information, may have to manually collect and input into geodatabases. And the usage, compare forecasted rainfall zones with past incidents to assess accuracy, overlay with vulnerable populations and infrastructure to identify areas needing prioritized evacuation planning. And hypothesis 4, we must examine environmental data to determine whether flooding occurs where specific environmental conditions make certain areas more vulnerable or if it is random. Uses all previous data sets, terrain, rainfall, deforestation, etc. This tests the null hypothesis by attempting to disprove correlations. The existing data is all sourced from previous hypotheses, data integrated into GIS systems and spatial databases. Additional data may require additional incident verification, possibly crowdsourced updates or recent satellite imagery after new flooding events. And the usage, spatial analysis to determine the absence of consistent patterns helps determine whether predictive evacuation models are viable and indicative of future flood events. This supports policymaking and future resilience strategy.
Proposed methodology. The spatialization phase of our project will be primarily human-centered. In this phase, we as human analysts will be doing research to understand why the location, South Kivu, is prone to flooding. We will be aiming to spatialize the event in the context of its life and physical space. Life space analysis will cover the ways local populations interact with their environment, identifying travel thoroughfares and urban centers. The physical space will be analyzed to see where flooding and landslides are most prone. This step in the geointelligence process will be human-centered because we are better equipped to understand the spatio-temporal context of flooding events in the area due to our experience and situational awareness. Recording methods. This step of the process will be machine-centered with human maintenance and oversight. All of our data and information will be organized and stored in a reliable Esri geodatabase. This will allow us to keep track of where the data came from, when it was collected, and how reliable it is. By maintaining and updating this data regularly, we ensure that our analysis stays current and useful. Integrating machines into the recording phase will help us manage large data sets and structure our analysis. Machines can automate the collection, geotag data, and categorize the incoming data. This reduces the time and effort needed for manual entry. Many of the data sources are likely to be in the form of unstructured text, making machine-assisted methods better suited to quickly record and catalog locational information in the database. In the discovery phase, we will use a mix of human-centered and machine-centered methods. Human-centered discovery includes historical research, such as reviewing old flood records, news articles, and conducting local in-the-field interviews to find patterns from past disasters. On the machine side, we can utilize LLMs to automatically detect population areas and flooding damage from satellite imagery. This helps us quickly spot changes and understand where people are living and what evacuation routes are viable, especially in informal settlements that may not be on official maps. Esri's deep learning building detection models and object-based image detection of historical satellite imagery are two of the primary tools that will help analysts with knowledge discovery, providing valuable insights from the raw data.
In the tracking phase of our methodology, we will use automated tools to monitor flood risks and changes. For example, after heavy rainfall, remote sensing tools can detect flooded areas or landslides. Tracking the volume of a river and its floodwaters over time can help anticipate on-the-ground impacts as well as downstream effects on surrounding communities. Object-based image analysis is particularly useful for identifying homogeneous features like water. Major rivers can be tracked over time to assess the increase in size. This is an example of changes in landscape over time. A simple AAG method would identify and create a polygon around a river with an area calculation performed after the polygon is created. With each passing day, the areas can be compared to see if the river is continuing to increase or decrease in size. However, object-based image analysis still requires input from a human analyst to associate pixel groups with object type. The results are heavily dependent on the image quality and the time lapse between captures. Historical, seasonal, and yearly tracking of water levels will help analysts determine patterns, anomalies, trends, and high-risk areas. Daily tracking of water levels will increase awareness for evacuation routes and give assessments in real time. The most effective tracking approach will primarily be AAG-centered, supported by human oversight and validation. For the comprehension part of the capstone, the optimal mix of methods once again involves both human-centered and AAG-centered methods. However, it will likely lean more towards AAG-centered methods due to the efficiency, accuracy, and storage capabilities of AAG technology. We will use large language models to help us analyze and understand our information. However, we will also utilize the analysis of competing hypothesis structured analytic technique to try to eliminate any possible biases that our team or the large learning models may have. In regard to the communication methods for our Capstone project, we will be utilizing a mix of human-centered and AAG-centered methods. As previously mentioned, we will be writing out important information including our limitations, sources, and methodology steps. This will help us to eliminate bias and build trust in our analysis. Assisted cartography can help us make the best choice for the visualization of our data, but we will need to check it and make sure that the program is making the correct assumptions about the data.
This methodology is optimal because it allows us to utilize AAG-centered tools like LLMs, geodatabase data logging, and object-based image detection to save time and quickly query large datasets. Utilizing AAG-assisted methods allow analysts to efficiently understand large geographic areas, while also allowing human analysts to fact-check and provide comprehension for complex spatio-temporal questions. Given the data available, including the Climate Change Knowledge Portal, OpenStreetMap Basemap, Open Data Project, and other sources, an LLM can help us efficiently break down data and help structure our initial analysis. The human-centered but AAG-assisted methods outlined above in our methodology will play to the strengths of each type of analysis. Humans are tasked with searching for relevant datasets and appropriately prompting LLMs to review the quality of information. Through reviewing sources and quality of information, particularly those produced by an LLM, we'll ensure we prevent the garbage in, garbage out phenomenon. Our recording method will entail loading data into an authoritative database. While relationships are often determined as an output from a computer tool, analysts will determine inputs and output relevance. Our tracking method relies more heavily on AAG-assisted methods, but will still use analysts to source data and interpret results. Our methodology will leverage the time saving and efficiencies offered by machines to allow analysts to focus their time on intensive analysis, verifying outputs, and providing accurate data.
There are both strengths and weaknesses to our proposed methodology. The strength of our methodologies come from the utilization of both human and AAG-centered methods throughout our process. By doing this, we increase our efficiency and limit the possibility of bias. The main limitation with our methodology, though, is the fact that there is no way to 100% eliminate all possible bias in our data. While our methodology does strive to eliminate as much as possible and be as accurate and up-to-date as possible, there's always a chance that there will be some bias or our data will be not fully up-to-date, depending on what our sources include and how often they are updated.
The anticipated results of our analysis will give us a clearer understanding of how flooding impacts the South Kivu province over time. This will help us identify vulnerable areas and populations and develop informed strategies for effective evacuation planning and disaster response. Each phase of our methodology is part of a comprehensive approach to understand and respond to flooding events. In the spatialization phase, we will better understand the spatio-temporal context of these disasters, which will ultimately deepen spatial understanding and identify why and which areas are more prone to flooding. The recording phase will produce an organized and regularly updated database that includes critical information to address the assigned scenario: rainfall totals, population distribution, land use, roadways, and river systems. During the discovery phase, we expect to uncover valuable insights from both human research into historical records and local interviews, as well as machine-assisted methods such as LLMs to detect population concentrations and flooding damage via satellite imagery. Tracking will enable ongoing monitoring of flood risks and landscape changes. This comprehensive methodology will provide a detailed picture of the impact of a flood, inform decision-making, and ultimately determine the areas at the greatest risk and how best to get those areas and plan evacuations.
The alternatives to this methodology would be to use only human methods or only AAG methods. Using only human methods would take too much time to complete, especially when considering the urgent nature of emergency preparedness. Some examples of human-only methods that are not suitable for this analysis include the manual recording of data. Geotagging, categorizing, and storing data using pen and paper would take too long and would be too tedious to query. Using only AAG methods would be less optimal for spatialization because machines do not understand the context of interconnected events. The life, physical, and intellectual spaces are each uniquely related to one another, something a human is better suited to interpreting. While AAG methods like large language models can be used to assist in this process, the data returned could be biased, misinformed, or too vague to fully draw conclusions and relationships.
To conclude, developing an optimal methodology for answering a geospatial intelligence question is critical for producing accurate, actionable intelligence. In the context of the Capstone scenario on flooding in the DRC, a strong methodology must balance machine automation and human judgment and oversight. The implications of a poorly crafted methodology can lead to incomplete analysis, overlooking key variables, or introducing or reinforcing biases. This ultimately leads to a lack of transparency and a compromise of our research validity. Without a clear flow between phases or reliable tools and techniques, analysts may misinterpret spatial patterns, ignore critical information, or miss information altogether. In real-world scenarios, such oversights could result in misallocated resources, ineffective policies, and even unsafe disaster plans. For the Capstone scenario, this could mean missing areas that have a high risk of flooding or not finding the safest evacuation routes for the people of South Kivu in a life or death situation. A weak methodology undermines the credibility of usefulness of the intelligence, and if the methodology isn't reliable, then the results won't be either. In summary, our team's methodology demonstrates that an integrated approach through blending both human and machine-centered methods is the most effective way to understand and respond to flooding in South Kivu province. Each phase of the geospatial intelligence process plays a vital role in the methodology. Human analysis guides contextual understanding and oversight, while automated tools enhance efficiency and accuracy. By balancing these tools, we can generate reliable data, detect spatial patterns, monitor these changes, and support decision-making. The combination of method types allows for an effective and communicated strategy for prioritizing evacuations and protecting vulnerable communities during disasters.